To become the president for salmon, you really have to know salmon. These magnificent beings that are part of one of the world's great migrations are in trouble in the North Pacific. One of their homes is in the rivers and streams of British Columbia. The Pacific Salmon Foundation is full-on committed to ensuring these beautiful fish survive. The PSF funds a wide range of stream restoration projects and scientific studies to tip the balance of changes in favor of salmon survival. Leading the charge is Jason Hwang, who takes us on his journey through his career that started with a fascination with fish, through a career in the Department of Fisheries and Oceans, to his current role as VP for salmon. You are the Vice President of Salmon at the Pacific Salmon Foundation. What exactly is that job? Well, I've never heard of Vice President of Salmon.
Well, and the Salmon Foundation has never had one before.
Yeah.
It's a new position that's been created upon the well-earned, at least semi-retirement of our previous president and CEO, Dr. Brian Riddle.
Yes.
And it's an evolving, I think, definition of what that job is. But in general, it's to provide some leadership and strategic vision and guidance to the Pacific Salmon Foundation's salmon programming, and build off the great work that Dr. Riddle has done, and work with our team of really world-class experts and our whole community of partners and collaborators on doing things that are going to hopefully make things better for wild salmon.
So does the role, I guess, represent the fact that you are at the Pacific Salmon Foundation, not just some kind of advocacy group or about salmon stream restoration, but you're actually doing science?
We do science. We support community groups with habitat restoration, salmon enhancement. We've also got probably one of the most innovative information assemblies and I'll call it a summary of known science related to stock and habitat status. On one of our teams are doing that. And we get involved in policy and advocacy and essentially anything that we can do from the Salmon Foundation side to help make things better for wild salmon. So we're very multidimensional as much as we can be.
Well, what does your job look like? Like, what are the kinds of things that you're doing? Because, yeah, you're VP of Science, but anybody who starts to get to that position of salmon, science, VP of Salmon Science in a way, you're not in the lab.
No.
But you are a scientist.
Yes.
And is it because you have to be able to understand what that science is and to be able to interpret it and then explain it in a way that can help to motivate changes?
Yeah, my job, it's a neat question. My job every day is different.
Yeah.
I'm not in the lab or out in the field with my waders on or anything like that. I would love to be. Yeah. But I do, as you sort of touched on, I need to be in a position to understand what these people of really deep expertise are doing, help to interpret that in a management, maybe a political sense, look for opportunities to take their deep knowledge and expertise and say, what do we do with that, and how do we take what is known or the questions that these people might be asking and turn that into something that either answers a question or takes an issue and makes the outcome of that better for salmon. Mm-hmm. So in any given week, I can be talking to some of our researchers that are working on things like aquaculture and potential issues for disease or parasites or things like that, understand what they're doing and how they're interacting with industry, government, and First Nations. And then I can move to something like talking to the U.S. Consul General about how experts from the U.S. can be brought into Canada to help inform and advise what we're doing here on our side of the border. Mm-hmm. I can be out with a community group, with my boots on, and they'll be showing me some of the great projects they did with funding that the Pacific Salmon Foundation was able to give them. And then I can be working on a plan with our team on what are the issues that we see coming and how are we going to get at those.
Right, and I gather a part of that also is advocating to governments, because we've got local, regional, and national governments that are all making decisions that are going to have an impact on salmon. And so you play an important role there as well.
We really try to, Stu.
Yeah.
We try to be positioned where our leading issue is things that are important to wild salmon, and we will work with everybody and anybody, and we try to work in a positive, collaborative, and constructive way. So that means we may not always agree with something that, say, government or another entity is doing, but what we try to do is point out where, if we do disagree, why we disagree, and talk about what you can do instead of getting into an argument or some kind of positional debate about something. We try to say, here's our understanding, here is our evidence, here is our concern, and here's what we think we can do about it to make things better.
Well, salmon are such an interesting species. I'm fascinated by how not just resilient they are, but the journey that they go through, the long migration, how they know where they're going, how they survive. How did you get to this position? What was the path of your career that made you say, I want to at someday be in a position where I'm advocating for salmon? Like, how did you get started?
Well, I think it's kind of it's a neat story. I grew up in the Lower Mainland. I used to go out to, say, White Rock, out in that area before it was popular, and I would take my fishing rod. My dad would take me out, and we would catch fish off the dock. We would catch crabs off the dock, and I started out doing that kind of thing. I would have, gumboots and a bucket, and I would go catch tadpoles in a creek or something like that. I was always into that kind of nature and water and fish. I loved everything about fish. When I was a young guy, we had family friends over on Vancouver Island, and I can remember taking the ferry across from Horseshoe Bay to Nanaimo when the old Vancouver Sun salmon fishing derby was on. And I would look out, and there were literally, as I remembered anyway, boats.
An ocean of boats.
From Horseshoe Bay all the way to Nanaimo. And I can remember looking out and seeing the rod bent over and guys, catching that salmon. And I thought, I want to do that one day. And then when I was a teenager, I had a buddy who knew how to go salmon fishing, and he took me out, and I remember catching my first salmon off Texada Island back in the days when salmon fishing was still good. And so when I finished high school and it came time to get a job or choose what you're going to do, I didn't know exactly what I was going to do, and I tried a little bit of biology, I tried some commerce, I tried some marketing. I was interested in all those things, but one day I thought, I want to do a job that I really, really like. I wonder if I could find a job I love instead of a job that just pays the bills.
Right.
And I looked around at what you could do at school, and I found this fish and wildlife program at BCIT. So I applied to that, and I got turned down the first year. It was a lot of people wanted to do that. My resume at the time wasn't strong enough, but I continued to do some night school. Was working part time, and I applied again, and they accepted me the second time. So I did a fish and wildlife diploma at BCIT. And I remember my dad thinking, oh, can't you just be a dentist or an accountant? Like, get a real job, right? Fish stuff is what you do for fun. It's not a job. But that summer, I got a job as a scuba diver with Department of Fisheries and Oceans, my summer student job. And that's when my dad said, oh, maybe it's okay. Maybe this guy is onto something. Maybe he'll be okay, and I'm not going to be supporting him my whole life. And so I started out with that. I got some part-time work, some summer work in fisheries type stuff, and I loved it. And so I finished my BCIT, and I thought, well, this is pretty good, but people in the business had said, you probably want to continue on, get your university degree, because that'll open more doors. And so as I went through that, I got other jobs, and one of the job I got that I thought, this is it for me, was a summer student working with the habitat management group with Fisheries and Oceans. And I thought, I love this, because you're in the business of looking at what people are doing out there on the land, but your job is to say, hey, if you're going to do that, here's what you need to do to make sure salmon are okay. And so that was my job. I went around and I looked at development activity, I monitored, I reported back. Eventually I learned how to do the reviews and the impact assessments on what is that activity that somebody wants to do going to mean for salmon, and how do we guide that so that you can have this idea of sustainable development, right? You can grow your lower mainland municipalities, but do them in a way that understands what that might mean for salmon, and try to steer it in a way that you can try to get a reasonable balance of both.
Little did you know how that was preparing you for your current role. Isn't that interesting?
It really is.
There was a stage in your career that you go, oh, okay, this is fascinating. Little did you know how important it would become later on. So where'd you go from there?
Well, and I didn't know that was a job, right? When I started, I didn't know anybody. It wasn't like my neighbor or my dad's friend who did this for a living. It was more an exploration and going where opportunity and interest kind of aligned. And I was very lucky. I had some opportunities that, I tried hard to get, but at the same time, I was lucky that maybe people saw something in me and gave me a chance.
Yes.
And I had some wonderful mentors early on in my career that are I would say, still mentors of mine today that have guided me along the way and gave me enough guidance to try things, but kept enough of a watch over me that I didn't do anything that was too far off the rails and falling into holes or something like that. And I would say it was a combination of good fortune, really good people guiding me, and also a curiosity and an interest to follow things that I thought would be, satisfy my curiosity and do something good. Like I wanted to, at the end of the day, have meaning and purpose to what I do, like I think a lot of people. And I really found a lot of meaning and purpose in doing things for salmon.
So did you go back to university and enhance your academic credentials?
So I went to university. I got my bachelor's degree at Simon Fraser, and I thought about carrying on to master's or further than that. But I got jobs, right? I got a job with the habitat side with DFO.
Yeah.
Or actually, I skipped a step. I actually had a job with a friend in Terrace, right out of university, doing some environmental consulting.
Yeah.
Right in the days when the Forest Practices Code was first coming online.
Yeah.
And it was wonderful work. I was, tromping along in the bush up there in the Terrace, Smithers, North Coast area, and really learned a lot, about what's happening on the ground and how does this the industrial development of things like forestry or roads or right-of-ways intersect with salmon.
Well, and then also the interplay with other animals that call that area home as well.
Yeah.
And their reliance on salmon.
Exactly.
Yeah.
One of my first days in the bush, I was charged by a bear, and it was lucky that I was with a giant French-Canadian guy, Luke, who scared the bear away. And he looked at me and said, "What are you doing? The bear was charging you." But, you learn by getting out there and doing stuff.
Yeah.
And so, I from that job, the Fisheries and Oceans group I'd worked with on the habitat side had an opening, and they said, "Hey, you could, we've got a spot. It's here for 6 months. Do you want to try it?" And I thought I really liked that work. So I went and tried that, and down in the Lower Mainland in Mission.
Yeah.
And then just as that was ending, they had another opening in Prince George. And I thought, oh, well, Prince George, I'll go there and try it. And I thought I'd go there for a year or two. I ended up staying there for 10 years. And then from there, I went to Kamloops, which I always thought, wow, that's hot and dry and brown. I'm not sure I see myself, ever targeting that as a place to land.
What took you to Kamloops?
My job opportunity, the job in Prince George was changing. And there was the option to do something that, again, looked interesting, satisfied my curiosity, worked for my family.
Yeah.
And so we moved to Kamloops.
And so what was that job?
That by then I'd moved from the operational side to the, I guess, operational but management side. So instead of being the guy that was out there doing it, I kind of became the supervisor and then the manager of the team in the interior of BC. That was, by then we were looking after habitat impact assessment and habitat management, as well as the whole salmonid enhancement program. So all the hatcheries, all the habitat restoration, and all the community advising programs, all reported up to the position I had as the area manager. So it was wonderful. We looked after everything from the U.S. border to the Yukon border, including the Canadian portions of the Columbia, the Fraser, the Peace River. And I had a great team of people working with me, and I got to go all over the place looking at stuff, learning about what the
Right.
people in those communities were interested in, and trying to fit salmon and fish habitat into their
Okay,
equation.
Jason, as I'm listening to you, that's a position that I go, okay, you have a tremendous amount of influence over the decisions that are made that are going to impact the survivability of salmon, and yet you chose to leave that to take on this role. What was it about this role that made you say, yeah, that's where I want to be?
Well, I'd worked in my jobs with Fisheries and Oceans. I'd worked with the Salmon Foundation on occasion through the Community Salmon Program and the grants that the Salmon Foundation gives out. I was on the side of DFO that, I guess, managed the DFO side of that in terms of getting the money that comes from the stamp over to the Salmon Foundation and making sure that the agreement between DFO and the foundation worked well. So I'd had a reasonable amount of interaction with them myself. Plus, I also knew of all the work that the foundation did beyond my direct involvement, like the work that Dr. Riddle and others had done on the Sailor Sea Marine Survival Program, as an example. So I always had held the Salmon Foundation as an organization that I saw in very high regard. And I really liked my DFO work.
Yeah.
But when I saw a chance to sort of spread my wings a little bit more, follow a curiosity, and maybe take a chance, I thought, well, it looks like a great job. I'm going to put my hat in the ring for that. And I thought, I think maybe they'll give me an interview, but there's going to be a lot of really talented people applying for it. But I went through their process and eventually, got down on the short list. And then I talked to my wife and I said, what if they actually offered me the job? And
oh no,
because when you have a government job, it's very secure, and I liked my job. It wasn't because I didn't think my job was wonderful, but she said, "You've been doing this a long time. You should try something new and go for it." And she really encouraged me to try something new, and I had all of the support of her and my sons to try it. And I thought, well, I am interested, and I'd been doing my fisheries work with DFO for a long time, and it was an opportunity to try something new in a place that I admired and had some good interaction with. And I thought you could probably do maybe a little bit more than I was able to do with Fisheries and Oceans in a place that worked closely with the government, but was outside of government. So you can be a bit more nimble and you have some flexibility to take things on fairly quickly and maybe, work in a targeted way to things that you think are important. And that's what it's turned out to be so far in my first 6 months or so with the Salmon Foundation.
As you talk about the course of your career, you used the word curiosity a number of times. If a young person is saying, I want to be you in the future, how important is curiosity in the development of a career like yours?
Well, I think my career, or I would say, I'd submit to any young person, anybody's career, is if you're able to do that, follow your curiosity and interest. I think what I hoped for and believed was, I think I can match that to something that pays the bills and to a career. And if you like it, it doesn't feel like work.
Yeah.
Right? It's something that you're really happy and enthusiastic about getting up to do every day, instead of, maybe the stereotypical dragging yourself out, to do something that isn't interesting to you. And so to me, the idea, if you have the opportunity to follow your curiosity, it's very likely to give you a chance to open doors, because you will probably be good at it if you're interested in it. And if you're good at it, there's a good chance you'll be able to match that with something, that you can do that pays the bills and provides that income that you need to support yourself.
And of equal importance, as far as I'm concerned, and why I think that these are careers that matter, is you're making a contribution that makes a difference.
Well, and that is something that I chose deliberately, or I hoped for. I tried, because as I thought about, early in my career or educational journey, thinking about, well, do I want to do something that is about making a lot of money? It's very tempting, and I kind of thought that's what I wanted to do. And maybe that takes you into the world of commerce. But I thought, if that's my only motivation, that seems narrow to me. And and this is not to criticize the world of commerce. It's what makes the world go around. But for me, I wanted to do something that had meaning to me personally. And so I would say to people, wherever you find that, maybe it's the environment, maybe it's the world of commerce, maybe it's something else. But wherever you find that meaning to you, it's a really good way to focus, I think, your thinking, because if you're interested in it and it has meaning to you, there's a good chance that it'll have meaning to other people.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing that.
Well, thank you, Stu.
Yeah.